You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. And yes, I'll start with the usual warning. My Hebrew pronunciation is sketchier than a gangster's alibi. Luckily, today's topic doesn't require much Hebrew, unless you count chutzpah, which these guys had in spades. Today's topic is Jewish gangsters in America. That's right, we're going from Moses to Meyer Lansky, from the shtetl to the speakeasy. If you thought Jewish history was all bagels, books, and bar mitzvahs, buckle up. There's also bullets, bootlegging, and backroom deals with Italian mobsters. It's a story that's half The Godfather, half Fiddler on the Roof, with a little Goodfellas sprinkled in. And like most Jewish stories, it's complicated. There's pride, there's shame, and there's a lot of, really? That guy was Jewish? So grab your black and white cookies, put on your fedora, and let's talk about one of the most surprising chapters of Jewish American history. When Jewish immigrants came to America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, most were poor, crammed into neighborhoods like New York's Lower East Side. Opportunities were limited, discrimination was common, and some people looked for fast ways to escape poverty. Enter the underworld. Just as Italians had the mafia and the Irish had their own gangs, some Jews saw crime as their ticket to the American dream. But let's be clear, most Jewish immigrants were law-abiding folks hustling with pushcarts, sweatshops, and delis. Not Tommy guns. Still, for a handful, running booze during Prohibition or skimming money off gambling parlors seemed more profitable than sewing shirts. Add in the chaos of Prohibition, when alcohol was illegal but everyone wanted it, and gangsters of every background suddenly had golden opportunities. Jewish gangsters carved out their own niche, sometimes working together with Italian or Irish mobsters, and sometimes butting heads. In that world, alliances mattered more than ethnicity. If you could make money, you had a seat at the table, even if you ordered matzo ball soup instead of spaghetti. Let's start with probably the most famous Jewish gangster, Meyer Lansky. Nicknamed the mob's accountant, Lansky was less of a trigger puller and more of a numbers genius. He partnered with Italian mob boss Lucky Luciano to build the National Crime Syndicate, a kind of corporate merger of gangs across America. Think of it as the Google Calendar of crime, keeping everyone coordinated so they didn't step on each other's rackets. Lansky was behind casinos in Havana and Las Vegas, and he helped modernize organized crime, turning it into a business rather than random street fights. Unlike the flashy Al Capone, Lansky was reserved, quiet, and shrewd. Some Jews viewed him with a strange mix of disdain and admiration. On the one hand, he represented Jewish brains being put to work, just for the wrong cause. On the other, he did occasionally funnel money to Jewish causes, including efforts to smuggle weapons to Israel before 1948. Was Lansky a criminal? Absolutely. Was he also a symbol of Jewish toughness in a world where Jews were often stereotyped as weak? Also, yes. If Lansky was the brains, then Bugsy Siegel was the charisma. Born Benjamin Siegelbaum, he reinvented himself as Bugsy, a flashy, violent gangster who loved fast cars, Hollywood stars, and sharp suits. He was one of the original Bug and Meyer mob, running around New York with Lansky before heading west. In Los Angeles, Siegel mingled with celebrities and helped build Las Vegas into a gambling empire. The Flamingo Hotel? That was his brainchild. Picture the Wolf of Wall Street, but in the desert with neon lights instead of penny stocks. Siegel was charming, but also terrifying. If you crossed him, you might end up on the wrong end of a bullet. His Hollywood connections made him almost glamorous, but his violent temper eventually caught up to him. He was murdered in 1947, sitting in his girlfriend's Beverly Hills home. The Jewish community's reaction? Mixed. Some quietly admired his chutzpah and ambition, while others were horrified that one of our own was in the headlines for racketeering and murder.
From unsolved mysteries to unexplained phenomena, from comedy gold to relationship fails, Amazon Music's got the most ad-free top podcasts, included with Prime. Because the only thing that should interrupt your listening is, well, nothing. Download the Amazon Music app today.
I've gathered you you here today for a family strategy meeting. Johnny, after dinner, you get 30 more minutes of counting practice on iExcel. Meanwhile, Timmy, you get to use iExcel for your long division. Let's do this. Try the learning product families trust at iExcel.com.
With Toyota, affordability isn't about cutting back, it's about getting more. See your local Toyota dealer for a spacious new Grand Highlander or RAV4. Great financing and lease options for qualified customers. Visit buyatoyota.com for more. Toyota, let's go places.
Then there's Arnold Rothstein, often called the godfather of modern organized crime. If that name rings a bell, it might be because he inspired characters in Boardwalk Empire and The Great Gatsby. Rothstein was the guy who fixed the 1919 World Series, bribing players to throw the games. He was the ultimate gambler, making millions off horse racing, poker, and bootlegging. Unlike Siegel's Flash or Lansky's bookkeeping, Rothstein was all about strategy. He taught younger gangsters, Jewish and Italian alike, how to think big, run their operations like businesses, and diversify income streams. Honestly, if he'd gone legit, he could have run Wall Street. But his life ended like many mobsters, with bullets. He was shot in 1928, supposedly over unpaid gambling debts. Rothstein was both admired and reviled. Admired for showing Jews could be power players in America. Reviled because, well, his claim to fame was fixing the national pastime. Try explaining that one at synagogue. Of course, Jewish gangsters didn't work in a bubble. They teamed up with Italian, Irish, and even black gangsters in different cities. The classic example is Murder, Inc., a syndicate of hitmen for hire in the 1930s and 40s. Led largely by Jewish mobsters like Louis Lepka Buchalter, this was basically the Uber Eats of murder. You placed your order, and they delivered. They carried out contract killings for the mafia, enforcing discipline across the underworld. Not exactly the Jewish story you heard in Hebrew school, right? But here's the thing. These alliances blurred ethnic lines. Jews, Italians, and others learned to trust each other when money was at stake. Yet, when trials came, headlines often screamed, "Jewish gangsters," embarrassing many in the Jewish community, which was trying hard to prove loyalty and respectability in American society. The idea that Jews were running death squads for the mob was not great PR, especially with anti-Semitic stereotypes already painting Jews as shady schemers. So how did Jews themselves feel about these gangsters? Honestly, it was complicated. On one hand, many Jewish leaders condemned them, worried that gangsters reinforced negative stereotypes. Rabbis gave sermons warning against glorifying crime. Parents didn't exactly want their kids growing up to be Bugsy Siegel. But on the other hand, there was a sense of secret pride. At a time when Jews were being bullied, excluded, and sometimes beaten in American cities, tough Jewish gangsters showed the world that Jews weren't pushovers. Stories circulated of mobsters protecting Jewish neighborhoods from anti-Semites. In the 1930s, some Jewish gangsters even disrupted pro-Nazi rallies in New York, literally punching Nazis before it was a meme. So while they were criminals, they sometimes acted as defenders of the community. It's like rooting for Walter White in Breaking Bad. You know he's a villain, but you can't help but feel a little proud of his smarts and guts. Over time, though, Jewish involvement in organized crime faded. By the 1950s and 60s, assimilation, education, and new opportunities gave young Jews legitimate paths to success. Instead of bootlegging, they became doctors, lawyers, professors, and yes, Hollywood executives. The mob shifted more toward Italian and later other ethnic groups. Jewish gangsters became more of a historical curiosity, remembered in movies, TV shows, and books. Bugsy Siegel gets glamorized in Bugsy, Meyer Lansky pops up in mob documentaries, and Arnold Rothstein lives on in Boardwalk Empire. But within the Jewish community, the attitude shifted to embarrassment. They were part of the past, not the future. Synagogues don't exactly brag about having mobsters as alumni. Still, every now and then, there's a nostalgic nod to their toughness, a reminder that Jews weren't always seen as meek scholars with glasses. They could swing a bat, run a casino, and make a deal with the best and worst of them. Today, the legacy of Jewish gangsters lives more in pop culture than in reality. They're immortalized as colorful characters in gangster lore, blending into the larger story of American organized crime. For some Jews, they remain a source of shame, proof that even our community had its dark side. For others, they're remembered as symbols of survival and toughness during hard times. Think of them like the anti-heroes of Jewish history. Not role models, but not irrelevant either. They remind us that Jews, like every group, had people who broke the rules, pushed boundaries, and sometimes left a permanent mark on history. And let's be real. Gangster stories, with all their danger, drama, and swagger, are endlessly fascinating. So next time someone mentions Meyer Lansky or Bugsy Siegel, you'll know the real story, not just the Hollywood version. And maybe you'll think about how Jewish identity, like any identity, is full of contradictions. Scholars and gangsters, rabbis and racketeers, yeshiva students and street toughs. That's our deep dive into Jewish gangsters in America. From Arnold Rothstein fixing the World Series to Meyer Lansky running casinos to Bugsy Siegel dreaming up Las Vegas, they were larger-than-life figures who left a complicated legacy. Were they villains? Heroes? Something in between? The answer depends on who you ask. But one thing is clear. They were part of the Jewish American story, for better or worse. Thanks for hanging out with me on this episode of Everything Jewish, 10 minutes at a time. And hey, if you liked this journey into the darker, more surprising side of Jewish history, make sure to tune in for more episodes where we explore every corner of Jewish life, from the Torah to TikTok, from bagels to, apparently, bullets. Until next time, stay curious, stay entertained, and please don't fix any baseball games.